Hi, I'm Blake Rayhans.
And I'm Stacie Mallon.
And you are listening to the Optimized AF podcast.
We know life is hard. We're here to make it simple.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Optimized AF podcast. This is Blake.
And I'm Stacie, and we are here with a guest for our first guest of the season.
First guest of 2021. Woo-hoo.
Yes. And I will let him do an introduction of himself for the most part, but I'll tell everybody how I got to know Dr. J, and that is through someone who's also been on the show before. So the incomparable Brian Moore. And apparently the incomparable also Jackie Moore was also involved in this connection. And so this introduction was made possible due to B. And he introduced Dr. J and I because Dr. J was going to be launching something new out of a career that is full of just incredible connections and opportunities. And Dr. J is going to give us a little bit of a scope of that on how he's built something really incredible with not just for himself, but for his family. His wife is involved in his business as well. And so we wanted to have him on today because the name of our podcast is Optimized AF. And that is what he does for people every single day. So I felt like of all the guests that could be great for this show, I think this is a great match for us. So there are a few things to mention and to note. One thing that I think we'll get into today is that Dr. J, you treat, people of all different ages, and just whether you are a professional athlete or you are someone who is a high school athlete or even smaller children, right? You run the full gamut. So I think that's important to note because I think everybody right now, as parents, as partners, as leaders, we're all kind of watching people struggle. So we want to talk a little bit about that. But I think also the thought process that where is everybody today and what you're seeing as people walk through the door. I think it's important to just give everybody a little bit of a level set on right where you are is probably right where most people are. But first, just give us a little bit about your story, which is a great story. So I'd love for you to tell it.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and what a fun way to kick off the new year too. So I'm really grateful. I like to joke that I had to heal the emotional scarring of seeing my dad in a Speedo bathing suit on a regular basis growing up. Dad, if you've ever listened to this, I love you, but I apologize. So I grew up, my dad was a competitive bodybuilder and also a really natural-oriented holistic chiropractor. And growing up in that environment, I was around people who didn't buy into aging. So I was around people who really wanted to access the greatest level of potential and performance from their body and from their way of being. And I think that really planted so many seeds for me about really knowing that our natural state can be filled with vitality and health. I originally thought I was going to be involved with senior citizens. I got kicked out of... Should I lower this a little bit? Okay. I got kicked out of my first senior citizen community when I volunteered in a senior center, and I left little notes on the bedpost of some of the patients sharing that I thought the physicians were causing what's called iatrogenic-caused disease, which is called physician-caused disease. In other words, at 18, I was criticizing the medication that they were giving the seniors, and I was volunteering for the National Honor Society, and I was quickly escorted out of the building. And then, so 2 weeks later, I don't give up very easily, which Stacie knows about me, so I volunteered at another senior center, and I really wanted to bring unconditional love and healing and amplify their immune system through the love of animals. So I contacted the Humane Society, and I had dogs and cats pull up in a van to the senior center. However, I did not get approval from the community events coordinator, and I was quickly escorted out of that second volunteer. So I was fired from 2 volunteer positions in seniors care centers, if that says anything about my character. But so that planted the seeds for my parents really sitting me down and saying, you may not be the best employee. and we've raised you to possibly be a little more out of the box and entrepreneurial
agreeable.
And
This is our nice way of saying we want you to fall in line.
So it kind of planted the seeds. I really resisted my upbringing because I saw some of the pain that my dad went through as an early holistic practitioner.
Control your coffee, please.
Years ago, Whole Foods was not as big as Home Depot as it is now. And, I grew up where when we went to the health food store, people looked pale and possibly looked like they needed to take a little bit more of their own advice when they were working there. And just people were a little extreme and out of balance. And I think it really, just coming from that consciousness, I think health was my birthright. I think knowing how to access potential and how to embody that was normal for me. I've never had an aspirin in my life. I've never had a Tylenol. Some people collect baseball cards, and our family collected strategies for resiliency. So all that planted seeds. Eventually, I got my doctorate in chiropractic, and then my fastball topped out at about 72 miles per hour in senior year in high school, so my prospects for playing professional sports was very low. And I don't really drink, so my dad would pay for me to fly and visit doctors who were really focusing on amplifying performance as opposed to just treating symptoms. The World Health Organization definition of health is optimal physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or symptoms. We're all either engaged or married in this room, and no one would ever say somebody has the most amazing, fulfilling marriage or relationship if you're not hitting each other with pots and pans. Or no one would say you have the most beautiful, amazing, highly functioning car if the hubcaps aren't falling off and it's not leaking oil. And yet for some reason we've defined health as the absence of symptoms. And no one would ever say a business is absolutely thriving if they're not going out of business. And that thinking really inspired a lot of my future actions. And I've started studying how can we help people heal with gentle intervention instead of forcing our will on the body. And I really started being around doctors, and I would take them out for lunch, and you can tell I'm not shy, and I would ask questions and follow them around. And my dad, I'm so grateful, my parents funded this. And I would visit people, and I would ask them, what was their outcome assessment when they were working with somebody? In other words, what do they want to see the next time they see the patient? And a lot of people couldn't answer me. And it drove me crazy because even though I was grateful they were serving the patient in the moment, a lot of times they weren't necessarily creating a strategy for what they want to see for this person ongoing. And it kind of turned me into a mad scientist of seeking out mentors that were strategic in helping the body regain balance and then ultimately increasing athletic performance. I was originally published to show that you can increase athletic performance when you have more synchrony in the nervous system. And then that led to eventually working with men's golf and women's tennis and women's basketball and men's baseball at Arizona State University. And then I had a profoundly life-changing experience. I worked with the second baseman for the Boston Red Sox, Dustin Pedroia. And then he referred me to the center fielder for the Boston Red Sox. And then they flew me to spring training, and I was in the shower of the famous manager, Terry Francona, not naked, but they snuck me into the shower.
Important element to point out.
Of the famous manager.
FYI.
Yeah.
And they started bringing in famous players, David Ortiz, who's known as Big Papi, and all these famous players, and they're sneaking these people into the shower for me to work on them on my treatment table because I wasn't approved medical staff yet. And then they bum rushed the famous manager's name is Theo Epstein, or the general manager's name is Theo Epstein, very well known in sports. And they said, this is our guy. This is who we absolutely want to collaborate with. He's absolutely created something really different that creates balance in the body. It really helps us. It didn't help that one famous pitcher used some extremely strong language and said, all you blank blanks have been working on me for this amount of time. And this short M blank walks in, and I already am doing better after an hour of care. And so I'm sort of like, we'll just call him Bob. I'm like, Bob, you're not helping at all. Like, I'm snuck in the shower.
Don't build my case.
Yeah. They snuck me in the shower, and then, like, you're making fun of the people that I'm supposed to possibly be collaborating with. And so my life profoundly changed. And that was also the beginning of me learning about what it means to be balanced personally because I was running private practice. I practiced with my wife in Ahwatukee. And then I was also doing men's golf, women's tennis, women's basketball, men's baseball, then flying overnight to Boston, taking care of elite athletes in Boston, then flying back, being an amazing father to my young daughter, but not necessarily always the most amazing spouse because I didn't have enough left. And it really taught me optimal physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or symptoms. I was performing so well in my professional life, but it also had profound opportunities to walk my talk and become more balanced personally. And then I started working with the Philadelphia Phillies on top of that, so I still didn't learn my lesson. So I was still flying all around the country. And then eventually all of the clients that I was taking care of, I started with one client in Major League Baseball, and then over the years I had something outrageous like 254 clients. And I'm so grateful that somebody put my body of work in front of Derek Hall, the president of the Diamondbacks. And then I was able to stay home, and this is my 8th year serving the Diamondbacks, and then also I'm the performance specialist for the Arizona Coyotes, and then still at Arizona State University Athletics, and then a whole bunch of other goodies. And I guess if I had to really sum up a little bit of my journey, I would say I constantly help people connect to the consciousness that your biography, your life story, is intertwined with your biology, your physiological story. And if you can help people understand the wisdom and messages that your body emanates and help you to learn from that so that ultimately you can become more resilient, I find that people are able to access potential more than ever.
It's a fantastic story.
And you can't imagine why I asked Dr. J to be here.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was just thinking to myself, like, what was Stacie thinking, But
whether it's the pure, unadulterated rebellion and troublemakerness, which, that was only my brand for the last 10 years.
Yeah, true.
Just fight the power. But also, we've talked a lot on this show about that mind-body connection. We've talked a lot about how to help people start in practical ways, because I think one challenge that Blake and I, when we originated this podcast, it was because we both came out of consulting. Consultants like to make things complicated so you can make more money off of your clients, because the more complicated you make it, the more they realize they can't really solve the problem themselves. They need you. And then you walk around with the big stick and stir things up. I'm not like throwing consultants under the bus. That's just the reality.
No.
Sorry to the big five, but not sorry at all at the same time. But what we realized is people would read books. The first book we talked about was Atomic Habits. It's a great book, but you walk away thinking,
it's overwhelming.
I don't know what to do first.
You don't know where to start. Yeah.
So,
although not a knock on James Clear, I mean, he gave some incredible strategies, but he also gave people a plethora of them. And I think if you're just going to pick the book up off the shelf and you're going to read it, you're going to get a tremendous amount of incredible advice and information and tactics. You just, I mean, again, I don't want to knock, because I think he does guide people on a place to start, but I do feel like human nature is you want to try to take on all the information. And I don't think it did a great job of kind of reminding people, hey, you know what, check yourself just a little bit. Just kind of add on to this. Let's do the snowball effect. Start with the thing that works and then build it. People
like Blake and I buy his journal. This is the story we always tell. Yeah. We both read the book independent of each other. We both bought his journal. And then we both came into the studio one day and had the journal. And I was like, oh, do you use the journal? And Blake was like,
I think the last time I opened this was.
And I said, well, I use it for a notebook. So we're both on the same page, because it was the thought process. But what we started to talk about is, how do we take specific elements of that book as an example? So habit stacking. So we drew out specifically habit stacking, which for me was a learning, right? How do I start to build greater habits by stacking them on existing habits? And that is how the psychology works. You know this. So we were having all sorts of microphones. What's going on with us today, Nick? So I want to do the same thing here, because I think we could probably have you back 100 times, and maybe we will have you back 100 times. And we would never really be able to digest the full career that you've had and all the lessons that you've learned. But tell us a little bit right now, today, as you walk into your practice this week, or walk into the Diamondbacks, the locker room this week, what are the things that you're
specifically
seeing?
Getting to when you enter into the showers? She'd like to know more details about that. If
yes,
you could
that would be.
I'm just going to say it for you, Stacie, because I knew where you were going.
I appreciate that very much, Blake. You're welcome. Where are people at today with everything that's going on?
So I had the opportunity to do a little public speaking before kind of the planet got very interesting. And so that was applicable even a year ago, and it's even way more applicable now. I invited the audience to, if they felt safe, to close their eyes. And I said, if you have a dog or cat, please picture your dog or cat if you have a pet. And then I said, please picture a loved one. It could be your child or a spouse or a dear friend. And then I said, please picture the color of your car. And then I said, please picture a tree that's possibly in your front yard. And then I asked people to open their eyes and come back to the room. And I said, just now, you were able to access different gears of your awareness. You were able to be the driving force of where your mind went. And, whether or not you want to get esoteric, I wasn't really asking them to change space-time travel and quantum physics in terms of actually implying they were outside at their car at their time or with their loved one, so to speak. But just the ability to access that state of awareness, to access different gears. And I said, so who was in charge at that time? And awareness was driving mental focus. And if you think about what's happening right now, people are constantly in a state of the fight or flight response. If a dog or a cat was to, absolutely, or a ferocious tiger was going to attack somebody you love, you better be able to access your greatest state of readiness and awareness and heightened muscular contraction to be able to rescue that person. If, God forbid, they were laying in the middle of Camelback Road and you had to scoop them up and, but a day later, a week later, a month later, a year later, if your nervous system is still firing like the emergency is at hand, then you're still locked in that fight or flight response. And what I'm seeing is from a physiological level, from a consciousness level, from a respiratory capacity, people are oftentimes operating right now as though the emergency that possibly was a while ago could have happened an hour ago. Their level of stress hormone, their cortisol levels in their body are so high. Their level of muscular contraction is so high. And their ability to access peace, just the way I was talking about that exercise about picture your loved one, picture your cat, their ability to access peace, their ability to literally connect to a place of focus where they can feel centered has been radically challenged and diminished for many. And then on top of it, we've often become experts at practicing distraction, right? We're constantly surrounded by electronic devices. We're constantly surrounded by messages that maybe don't serve our greatest being, or maybe it's important to be aware of the messages, but how long do you want to stay engrossed in them? And I find that people feel very fragmented and overwhelmed. And I think since 9/11, a lot of people have even lost the natural ability to dream. I don't necessarily mean dream in their sleeping state. I mean thinking about what's possible. And I love helping people reconnect to what's possible. And that's why I love what you guys are doing. Because if you think about optimization, it doesn't mean getting by. It's the absolute opposite of that. No one wants a relationship that's just getting by. Like, I'm not signing up for that. You don't want your children, I'm so grateful my daughter does well in school. I don't want my child just to get by. And I want to help people reconnect to that possibility again. And that's what I talk about every day.
Yeah, optimization is it's a pursuit, right? It's not a finish line. We've talked about this before. Optimization can seem daunting to people because you say, well, am I ever done? right? And you're not really, it's sort of that, just the desire and the pursuit of doing something better today than I did it yesterday. But I also want to bring it back to something that you said in there, because when you listen to the fight or flight, and then the response, and then I hold on to this for, the thing that I was reminded of is, and I want to make the correlation because I don't think this is what you're saying, but you think about the Boy Scouts, right? What's their motto? Like, always prepared.
Always be prepared.
Always be prepared, right? And you can construe that and say, well, there's a lot of value in always being ready, always having that heightened sense of what could happen and all this planning. But I don't think that's what you're going to. There's a lot of value in that. But what you're saying is that in the moment, people have this inability to take something that has occurred to them, or take a situation that they've gone through, and be able to let that be what it is. Let it be the thing that happened an hour ago. Acknowledge it, be aware of it, take lessons from it, and then move on. Tap into those lessons if you need to, a year, 2, 5, 10 years later, but don't hold on to them like the Boy Scouts, where I'm always prepared. It's got to go into my toolbox, and I always have to bring it along with me. It's in my backpack.
Yep. And I have Dr. J and I have talked a lot more about this, because Blake and I grew up very similar to one another. And that is that we were really on our own pretty early in our life, much earlier. If I think about the children in my household being on their own right now, it petrifies me. But the reality was I was on my own at that age. And I think Blake was in the exact same scenario. And so one thing you and I have talked a lot about is also to the consciousness and your history really having an impact on your biology. And I think in the last year, even if nobody's had a perfect life, that is not something that ever happens. Everybody has their perspective and their journey.
Well, except for Nick. Nick lives pretty well. Our producer, Nick,
he's perfect.
Yeah.
But even if
Love
people,
you,
even if people had a pretty idealistic journey, in the last year, everyone has experienced some element of loss or some element of radical change and shift in what they know. So the question is, and by the way, I'm going to tease this now. This is more than a 1-part episode. We're going to do 2 episodes on this and potentially more later, but so at the end of this episode, this isn't the end of the story, but I do want to say, what's one thing as the folks are walking in, and obviously, when you experience the type of practice that you have, that's one element for folks. But what's the other advice you could give to some of our listeners right now, before we jump into episode 2, that is practical advice to ground and to level set and to get out of that flight response?
Yeah, and if I could add to that too, I mean, we're talking about the quote unquote, the regular people of us, right? Like the soccer moms, the dad who's just trying to figure out how to be, to your point, really be present as a really incredible father. Although, he's trying to juggle a career because he was fortunate enough to hold on to his job last year, but maybe that created different stress and everything. So although you'd get to work with and have the incredible opportunity to work with these elite athletes, there's a certain level of commonality that is applicable to every single one of us, regardless of our situation.
Years ago, I read one of the most profound books called Change or Die. And one of the principles of the book was there were people that were smoking out of a tracheotomy. So that literally they had such intense patterns of throat cancer, but they still chose to smoke out of the tracheotomy. And then there were other people that had such profound shifts in their commitment to creating change, where there was no going back, where they hit this point of threshold. And I think about, how do you help people connect to what's not negotiable, right? Like today, Stacie joked she only had a few minutes on the bike, but the fact that she got on the bike was a non-negotiable, and it was a victory, even if it was 7 minutes as opposed to a 20-minute ride. There's something profound about saying this is a ritual that is a non-negotiable, right? Like if someone said, you have to walk on glass in order to make sure my daughter's going to eat healthy. I'm taking my shoes off. I'm walking on glass because I'm going to put the most profound fuel possible in my daughter's body to amplify her resiliency. So I think if you can help people reconnect to their value set of what is non-negotiable to actually help them stay resilient and really create an accountability system, some form of tribe, somebody that helps them stay connected to that level of accountability of their non-negotiables, they are able to more greatly access, a state of resiliency and thrive. So for everybody, it's a little bit different, but there are some core ones. It's really hard to get through life without feeling rested. It's really hard to get through life without having proper hydration. It's really hard to get through life without proper fuel. In my world, I believe it's really hard to get through life without having a clear and magnificently dynamically flowing nervous system. It's hard to get through life without being connected to fulfillment. So those are just a few, but if you can help people really start defining what are their non-negotiables, so that they ultimately know what helps them have their strongest and healthiest foundation, and just creating a ceremony of them even asking that, even if someone doesn't have exceptional means, but if there's anything they could do that can help them access their non-negotiables.
I think that's great. I mean, we talked about it literally just in some of the last episodes a couple weeks ago about commitment, and really, we brought up the quote that, I should look it up because I keep thinking, I think it's Tony Robbins. I should look it up and confirm, but he says, we get 100% of our musts, not our shoulds. And that leads to commitment, leads to what you're referring to as non-negotiables. And I kind of wonder if, for the listeners, how many people know what that list is? Right. Just right now, if you said, and how many people can really effectively sit down and go, here's exactly how I live my life and why these things mean so much to me, and the value system, like you said, I think that's an incredible exercise for people to do. Is if you were asked that question and you feel like you literally would have to stop and go, and ponder it, well, then you should probably make the time today to sit down and make that list. And I think that's an incredible value. It's hugely valuable just because of when you think about what then percolates off of that. You get to make decisions in your life every single day now based upon that list to put you in a better position to fulfill those things. If not, you and I, Stacie, we've referred to this several times. You end up living your life like a damn ping pong ball that somebody throws out into traffic that just bounces boom, 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 boom off of every car that hits it. And you're just happenstance going through just whatever decision. Bumping through life. Mm-hmm. What a terrible way to embrace one of the greatest gifts that we all have the opportunity to have, is to live our life with fulfillment and make an impact on this place.
I think one way to think about this, based on what both of you just said, is if you haven't done this exercise already, we encourage you to do it in December. And then we gently nudged you again in the beginning of January. So we'll reinforce this for not the final time. I will never promise it's the final time. But if you haven't done the work yet, of the pillars that Blake talked about in December, of the elements that Dr. J just talked about, just make the list in your life from, sleep, repeat those pillars, Dr. J. So sleep.
Yeah. I mean, anything from sleep, any ways to access peace. How do you define fulfillment?
Nutrition.
Nutrition and hydration and focus and, the pillars in December. I tell you what we're going to do is we're not going to give them to you. Go back and listen. All right. There you go. That's what you're getting from me today. All right. I'm going to optimize your experience by optimizing our listenership. No, just kidding. But no, you get the 5 pillars.
Make the list.
Love, career, money, spirituality and personal development. And I think it's relationships is the 5th one. I'm blanking on it this morning. But.
So make that list and identify where you have strength today. And where you feel depleted. And I would say most people would tell you sleep is consistently suffering. As very few people, I won't say that because I have help in that area.
You have the most incredible nighttime routine that sets you up for rest and relaxation.
I have a full nighttime routine, which we can dive into later. And then what about the other elements? Are you hydrating? We all have, well, Blake doesn't, apparently he's fallen down on the job today, but we have hydration today. You have your coffee.
My dehydration.
But do that work. And then before you jump into episode 2, I just encourage you to re-listen to this if you need to, but do the work of breaking that down for yourself, because we've emphasized it so much, because I don't think there's anything more important than evaluating your current state, right? Even as consultants, we start with what's your baseline? What's your foundation? What is the current state? It always starts with
an assessment.
Yeah.
Always starts.
So do that assessment, and then join us for episode 2 as we dive a little deeper into...
Next week's episode, we'll get into some of the, I think we'll, come back for some stories about some of the work that's been done with professional athletes and some other things like that. But the... Stacie, you mentioned this earlier, the reality of everyone last year is we were probably, I would go as far as to say, I doubt any single person is immune to the fact that you were likely affected either in your career or in your health. Even if it was just purely from the stress of everything that last year, and even continuing even now and today, even the events of just a few days ago, that has a profound impact on some of the decisions that many of us made. Now, there's probably some people out there that had these systems that you're talking about, Dr. J, in place that were able to weather the storm a heck of a lot better than most. And we want to touch on that next episode. Come back for those stories. But I think we really want to tie this to how you can all relate to the impact of the circumstances that we go out through our conscious day and how that carries into our unconscious sleep. And that repetitive cycle of bad sleep, bad days, bad sleep, bad days. How do you break that cycle?
So let's dive into
that next time.
I love it. Let's do that, because I think as my warrior mommies out there, for example, my fitness warrior mommies that I talk to all the time, that's a very prevalent issue. You have young children. I have older children who game all night long and who apparently don't need sleep because they're zombies. So I think it's just a very relevant issue. So I think let's dive into that next time. And for this episode, we'll wrap up. Thank you, Dr. J, for joining us, and we'll hear from you very soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to our show. You can find Blake and I on social media channels at Blake Rayhans and at Stacie Mallon.
Be sure to follow Optimized AF on Instagram and rate and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. See you next time.